Akatu rolls on his pointer finger, Scooty rolls on his thumb to get the inputs in. The advantage of this grip is that it allows existing keyboard players to smoothly transition to controller, which would let them play in live events. However, this grip does have a few pretty glaring disadvantages. Firstly, the area to hit is much smaller when compared to normal rolling, and secondly, you could hit your thumb out of place, which would end your game instantly on higher speeds. In the end, Scooty shares the same sentiment as Akatu, where becoming a top player would be much easier with normal rolling, as this method is simply more difficult for the same reward. Before finally moving on to how to use rolling in-game, I want to go over some of the accessories players use outside of the game. Something you might have been wondering about is why in almost all of the clips I've been using, the players are wearing gloves. The main reason for this is to remove any friction while rolling. Without a glove, the sweat of one's fingertips will accumulate more and more throughout a game, making your rolls less consistent, whereas with a glove, your fingers slide right off. Additionally, the glove reduces impact on the fingertips, which makes rolling overall a lot less painful. When choosing a glove to use, you don't want anything with any sort of grip, since that would defeat the whole point of removing friction, so any cloth or silk glove that's relatively thin should get the job done. One thing to note about using gloves is that they do wear out after long periods of use. A thinner glove can mess with your rolling, so be sure to replace them once you see they're becoming too worn out. Overall, you'll see most top players opting to use gloves. However, the main exception to this is 2023's world champion Fractal, who opts to use lotion to remove friction instead. Speaking of Fractal, he's also experimented using a sticky pad on his leg to keep his controller in place. When asked about his experience with this, Fractal says he saw an immediate increase in his play, which is evident when looking at the tournaments he dominated in. However, after a while, Fractal decided that it was worse for him as the surface became too sticky and it was harder to move the controller around. While hardly any players use sticky pads today, Fractal does still recommend it for people who may want to try it out. Aside from the sticky pad, you can also experiment with different materials to hold the controller in place, such as the player eyeball using a rubber band around his entire leg. I've left a link in the description to a page on the Classic Tetris Monthly website, which gives the Amazon links to all of the materials I've talked about here and more. I'll also leave links for any additional equipment I find. If you don't know where to start, you could try beginning with Eric's gloves due to them coming in large quantities and being pretty cheap. However, this is just my recommendation, and you should use whichever equipment suits you the best. Now that you've chosen your grip and want to play the game, where do you start from here? The hardest part of the initial learning stage is figuring out how to rotate and move the pieces at the same time. So let's take this in steps. First, you should get the hang of moving the pieces without rotating. The best way to practice this is through the level select, since it's a clear and fast way to see how many inputs actually register. You shouldn't worry about rotations too much until you're at least able to get 4 taps, given that 4 is the number of inputs needed to score a Tetris. Aside from using level select, you should also try playing on slower levels just to throw the pieces left and right. This is so you can clearly see how your rolling makes the pieces move, and so you can also practice timing your movement to when the pieces spawn. If you're having trouble moving the pieces and with rolling in general, you can skip forward to the troubleshooting section of this video where I cover in detail different ways to fix your rolling. As your 1 to 4 taps become more consistent, try going faster and faster until you're comfortable rolling at higher speeds. In addition to just moving the pieces fast, it's also important to make sure your rolls are even. The way rolling works is that you can't roll on every frame, since an input every frame is essentially the same thing as holding down the button. Because of this, the most optimal rolling is a roll every other frame, or rolling every 30th of a second. Getting a perfect roll is incredibly precise as you'd expect. However, to get as close as there as possible, you want to make sure each finger hits the controller for about the same amount of time, and that your fingers are well spaced enough so that they don't clump together. Once you can get your pieces moving at a speed you're happy with, now you can start adding in rotations. Perform the same process of throwing pieces to the wall, but this time, click one of the rotation buttons at the same time. Learning the orientations of the rotated piece doesn't matter, as this exercise is solely meant for you to build up muscle memory. As to when to rotate the piece, top players like Miles and Fractal both rotate in the middle of their rolls, so try to aim for something not too early but not too late. Make sure to practice rolling and rotating in both directions, and practice double flipping the pieces as well. Once you feel you have the muscle memory down, try starting on a very low level to play an actual game. At this point, you'll likely be spending a good amount of time on each piece, so take your time to learn how each piece rotates and how it feels to place pieces in the correct positions. From there, keep increasing the speed every time you feel comfortable, until finally, you'll be able to roll like a natural. As for learning 5 taps, I wouldn't worry about them too much initially, as 1 to 4 taps and rotations are much more important, and 5 taps usually tend to be the hardest part when learning how to roll. I will say though, that you should figure out if you want to be a quick tapper or a traditional 5 tapper early on, so that as you get the hang of 1 to 4 taps, you can still practice going for 5 taps even if they don't turn out good initially. Next, I'll be going over some potential fixes for problems you might be having with 5 taps. If your problem with 5 taps is that 2 fingers are clumping together, I would recommend playing games on lower speeds and moving the pieces exclusively using those 2 fingers. For me, this happened with my pinky and ring finger, but eventually these two were able to separate. If your problem with 5 taps is your thumb input, then I recommend you focus on twisting your wrist at the end of your roll so the base of your thumb is facing upwards by the end. This doesn't really apply to the top of the thigh grip where your thumb is facing upwards by default, but it does hold true for both the side of the thigh and foot grip. And finally, if you're having problems quick tapping, you're most likely quick tapping too early, so I recommend consciously waiting until you know all your fingers have rolled over before adding the quick tap in. As you become more and more confident that you're quick tapping after you roll, gradually speed up how fast you're rolling so you can practice getting your quick tap as close to the end of your roll as possible. With enough practice, your 5 taps, like everything else, will eventually become muscle memory. One of the most asked questions in the Tetris community is how can I get better at rolling? To be blunt, the answer is to keep practicing. In order to improve your rolling techniques and mechanics, you just have to keep playing until you fully develop the muscle memory and reaction time needed to play on higher speeds. But if you were looking for something more specific, here's a list of common practice methods. If all you have is an original cartridge of NES Tetris and nothing else, playing B-Type will be your best method of practice since you can learn how to dig and are forced to do very fast rolls. Vanilla cartridges allow you to play up to 19.5, which is level 19 speed with 12 rolls of garbage. Next, if you have access to a Game Genie or ways to put in Game Genie codes, you can use the code GPTEPG to make holding A while pressing start increase the level by 20 rather than 10. This will allow you to start on level 29, which will give you first-hand practice with the fastest speed in the game. In combination with GPTEPG, you can also use the code 6TOCKLE, which increases the level every 10 lines you clear. This can help you simulate how an actual game would feel, since without this code, you won't initially transition on a 29 start unless you've first cleared hundreds of lines. Additionally, you can also decrease the amount of rows to play on using the codes shown on screen. By playing higher, especially on level 29, this will force you to have solid mechanics and to roll faster if you want to survive. A popular height to practice on is floor 6, where you definitely need really good mechanics, but it isn't as if every roll needs to be 30 Hz. Play around and see which height suits you the best. Feel free to also use the code OPPEX to skip the rocket screen animation that happens if you score above 30,000. This is just used to save time. Finally, the next set of codes are a bit niche, but were something I used when just starting out. The codes OZPOEO and ZAPOOO, when used together, give you a very high chance to spawn squares on any given piece. I use this code to practice getting pieces over on level 29 without having to worry about other pieces getting in the way. Though with these codes, you're unable to practice 5 taps since squares only move 4 inputs to the left and right. Finally, over the years, the Tetris community has created many specialized practice tools that target all aspects of playing. There are far too many to cover here, but if you'd really like to up your game, I've left a link to the Classic Tetris Monthly Discord in the description, where you can ask around and find out more. Moving on from practice methods, we'll quickly touch upon some benchmarks to track your improvement. In general, the community likes to look at personal bests in 100,000 point increments. However, some of these increments stand out much more than others. The first major milestone to hit is 1 million points, also known as a max out. Having a max out shows that you have good stacking fundamentals and good enough rolling mechanics to score Tetrises on levels 18 and 19, though your kill screen play probably isn't fully developed at this point. Next is what I consider the necessary kill screen range of personal bests, which are from 1.3 to 1.6 million. You can technically score a 1.3 to 1.5 without needing kill screen, however you would need to be extraordinarily efficient, and scoring 1.6 million definitely requires kill screen. All in all, getting these scores typically require that you can survive on level 29 speeds for extended amounts of time. Either that, or have proficient enough stacking and mechanics to score Tetrises on the kill screen. Finally, any personal best above 2 million means that you're a highly advanced player who is comfortable playing on 29 speeds. Personal best above this point usually tend to be large jumps, since if you're able to play long enough to reach 2 million, you can probably play much longer and achieve much higher as well. Regarding level 29 personal bests, if you're starting out, then I suggest you focus on clearing lines rather than going for score speed. Finally, anything above 300 lines shows a
right here. I don't understand this.
Take a picture, bro.
Can you video chat us so I can show you? Okay. You're gonna video chat. I mean, is this real?
Yeah.
I don't understand what's happening. Are you like AI?